Hello, everyone. I'm Dominique.
And I'm Christina, and we are the Connected in Glass podcast.
Every week, we will feature interviews with glass artists who speak to their creative processes and overcoming challenges.
These conversations are real and raw. We hope that by sharing these stories, you're able to find some connection and know that you're not alone. We just wanted to take a moment to thank you for listening to our podcast. We're super passionate about this project and work for hours every week to bring you this content. So if you'd like to help support us, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/connectedinglass. Also, please consider joining our Facebook group, Connected in Glass Community, where we continue the conversations from these episodes. We'd love to hear from you. This episode of Connected in Glass is sponsored by Diddy Clips. Diddy Clips has changed the way we film our glassblowing videos, and we're proud to be working with them. Today, we're interviewing Jen Violette. She's a glass artist currently based in Wilmington, Vermont, who's been working with glass since 1991.
Hello.
Hi, how are you guys doing? Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. We're so excited. All right. So first, let's just skip the glass part of your life for now, even though I know that's kind of difficult. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about where you live, what you do for fun besides glass, and then we'll start working into your story with glass.
All right. We live in the small town of Wilmington, Vermont, tiny little town of about 1,700 people. It's pretty rural, it's a ski town and stuff. So we have a lot of second homeowners and stuff, but we've been here about 20 years. We bought our property in 2001, and I started doing a lot of gardening on the property, which is a big source of my inspiration. We did a lot of renovations to our home. We have an old farmhouse that dates back to the 20s and 1920s, and my barn, that's my studio, dates back to around 1890 as well. And so we first kind of hit the ground running here with doing a lot of the stuff ourselves and renovating as much as possible. I mean, the barn was old cow stalls that had layers and layers of old wood with like manure in between. It was pretty funky, and so we sort of tore all that out and then had a concrete floor poured and did a bunch of work to the studio. And all the meanwhile, I was also digging up the yard and putting in perennial beds and also vegetable gardens and just kind of living off the land a bit, and it's nice. Our yard is pretty wide open. So just enjoying our area here as much as possible. And it's a really beautiful place. We have lots of walking, hiking trails right down the road from our house. We do mountain biking and cross-country skiing or snowshoeing, that kind of thing. So that's some of the extra stuff I like to do, I guess, other than glass. But here in Vermont anyway, there's a lake we go swimming and stuff too, right at the end of our road here. So it's kind of a nice spot.
Cool. Okay. And I can see how all of that, just like your work, speaks to all of that too, All right. So I want to tell us about how you started with glass way back.
Yeah, way back. It's been a while. Yeah, it's hard to think back that far sometimes, back to the college days. But I went to Alfred University. I was there from 1990 to 1994, and that's when I got my BFA. But I started working with glass when a friend of mine who was a graduate student at the time, during my freshman year, we were only really allowed to start working with doing glass blowing our sophomore year. Freshman year was just set aside for freshman foundations and stuff. And so my good friend Brian Pike, who was one of the glass graduate students at the time, was helping teach our foundation class too. And one night, late at night, he asked a few of us freshmen, "Oh, do you guys want to try some glass blowing?" It was almost midnight. We're like, "Sure," and we each got to make a little something, and it was really cool. And it just was such an awesome experience. But my first thought was, of course, as everybody, "Oh my gosh, it's so hot," and you can't touch it, so you're using these tools. But just that little first taste of it really kind of made me think, "Oh, this is something I want to continue with." And of course, my friend Brian was like, "Oh, you got to take class next semester," So in sophomore year, we got to choose, and could choose 4 things. And so I did glass blowing, woodworking, printmaking, and painting. So I kind of was more from like a painting, printmaking background. I kind of thought that's what I wanted to do. But anyway, all the while I was still working with all the different materials and stuff. And so from that first experience, then I started working with glass my sophomore year. And Brian was one of my first teachers, along with Fred Sheeta, who does a lot of neon work and stuff. So I got a lot of pretty good basic skills. Brian Pike and Ian Lewis were two of the glass graduate students there at the time. And they're both based in the Seattle area now, but they both went to Mass Art, and they had this really great background of like some Italian glass blowing skill and everything. And so they were awesome to learn from, as well as Fred Sheeta. It was like intro to glass. So we kind of got some glass casting, some glass, glass blowing, glass sculpting, cold working, that kind of thing. And then from there, sophomore year, I continued into my junior year. I had Stephen D. Edwards as my teacher. He was great for glass blowing and sculpting teacher as well. And I also got to be an exchange student for at RISD for their winter session, which was like an 8 week long session. That was during my junior year. And RISD, it was actually set up by my teacher, Fred Sheeta, who's good friends with the head of the department there, who's named Bruce Chow at RISD. And Fred set it up. I really wanted to go to England. Some of my roommates were going to England for a semester. I thought, how cool. And Fred was like, no, don't go to England. Go to RISD. I got this guy that's going to be teaching there as guest artist. He's really awesome. I had no idea who he was, Dante Marioni. So I was like, okay. I took Fred's word for it. And I was like, Dante was 28 years old. He was still pretty early on in his career. So I went there, and my God, it was fabulous. I had no idea what to expect. I moved to Providence for those 6 or 8, I think it was 8 weeks long. And he was our teacher. It's usually somebody else as the teacher there. But so I was like the only outside student other than the RISD folks, and so it was an amazing hot shop. And that was really where I got some really good hand skill, like early on. And so I'd been blowing glass about a year, just over a year at that point, I guess. And so it was in 1993. And then let's see, that was super awesome. We did a lot of like real simple bottle forms, but really like perfecting our gathering and just keeping everything on center. And I just remember being like a sponge, just watching his every move, just absorbing everything, and just how he marvered, how he used the jacks, how he did this, that, and the other thing. And he also did some goblets and things. And, and some of the other students in the class are still good friends of mine up to this day, and it was Dave Walters was one of the students, Kate Rhodes, Robin Cass. It was just a really great bunch of people, and so, they became lifelong friends, which is kind of neat and in the glass world. And so from there, Dante was like, oh, I think you should really be in my class at Pilchuck this summer, which was that very summer. And he's like, I'm teaching there with Lino. Of course, I had no idea who Lino was either. I was very new to glass, and this was like 1993. And so anyway, make a long story short, I went to Pilchuck that summer for the first time. And I think I was 20 or 21 years old there. Was like total, probably like one of the youngest people there at the time. And definitely one of the freshest people in the class, didn't know all that much, but I had this basic skills that I had developed over the last year and a half. And so I was watching so many incredible things. At that point in time, Lena was making a lot of goblets and, a lot of cane work and submarini work, but it was very early on and, nothing sculptural at that point really. And so anyway, that I really absorbed the hand skill and stuff and sort of started making this series of, very early on series of bottles with holes poked in them, and I would put blown feet on them and stuff, and they turned into this series of clown bottles, I called them, that I ended up sandblasting and painting, and they became like part of my, over the next year and a half or so, they evolved into some of these bottles I made for my BFA show at Alfred in 1994. But that class at Pilchuck was really like just amazing for me. There was another friend of mine, Luca Rattazzi, was in that class, and he and I were sort of like he could speak Italian, which was awesome. He's Italian. And, but we were like two of the youngest people in there and with similar skill levels. So we got to work together, which was great because a lot of the other people were much further along than we were in their glass careers and skill levels. So, but again, some of the things Lino had us doing in that class was just make a very thin, very simple, straight ridged optic tumbler, and then make a twisted optic tumbler. But that straight ridged optic tumbler totally translated into trying to make a cane piece that had perfectly straight canes. And, stuff like that. I ended up getting my first pair of Jacks, my first pair of Dinos there at Pilchuck that year that I still use to this day, because the Pilchuck store you could buy just was very small at the time, but you could buy and I bought some Jim Moore shears, and it was just cool. You just buy them right off the rack. And so that was like my big splurges while I was there. And, but anyway, so then I went back to Alfred and had my, finished up a bunch of the pieces I had started there at Pilchuck, sandblasted them, painted some of them. It was sort of like the poor man's glass color. I would sandblast them and then I'd rub oil paint into the surface. Some of them I actually did fire on enamels with, which was kind of fun, but I called them clown bottles, and they kind of became this big series of footed blown glass bottles that were flattened and sometimes had multiple holes pierced through them. Some of them look like almost like a series of window panes, but in this long necked bottle with a foot. But anyway, so there's a whole series of them, and they kind of look like this little parade of these bottles. And I also did, some metal sculpture at the time. My teacher, Glenn Zweigart, he was great at Alfred, and I ended up making this huge scrap metal giraffe that was really a fun thing to make. And I even at one point I had gone out to Steiner blowpipe factory, and I got some of their old cut off blowpipe heads, that people needed new heads replaced. And I used those for the little antlers on the giraffe. It was the perfect thing. But anyway, so that was my welding experience. And so I have a little bit of basic welding experience, but then from there, it's kind of all evolved into over the years into what I do now. And sometimes I find myself revisiting some simple bottle forms and some of the newer pieces I'm doing. And that kind of echoes back to working with Dante and stuff. And so it's kind of fun to revisit some of those things. And just, I don't know, I've been really fortunate to study with a lot of really amazing glass artists over the years. And, I've studied with Pino Signoretto. I started going a little bit more sculptural, which was fabulous. I studied with him at Corning back in the 90s. A lot of the workshops I took were in the 90s at either Haystack or Pilchuck or Corning. And who else? Karen.
So while you're doing all this, were you completely serious about it? This is going to be my career path, or were you doing it this is really fun and I'm having fun exploring, or where was your mind at for it?
I started getting serious about it. More than just yes, I was having a blast, but at the same time, I was really just trying to hone my skills and just try to be the best that I could be, and I was really perfecting each little move and just trying to observe as much as I could. And I think eventually it sort of evolved into my career. But, at the time, in your early 20s, you're kind of a little bit unsure. I was starting to sell a few things at that point in time, just out of college and stuff. I worked at a couple of production studios. One of them was Steve Fellerman's shop. And I guess at that was my first experience he would let us use the shop after hours. It was a shop in the Berkshires in Sheffield, Mass, Steve Fellerman's shop. And he would let us use the studio late at night. And so sometimes we'd blow glass in the dark. It was really fun, but I would take some of those pieces and put them in his little gallery. And that was my first experience selling my work. And it was mostly bowls and pitchers and that kind of thing. Very simple stuff, but I was experimenting with powders and color and stuff. And it was nice he let us use the studio. And so at that point in time, I think I started to realize that, okay, maybe I could, and I started selling more pieces. And so I would make more work. And then, from there, I started more assisting other people, and I think that's kind of I went and I worked with Bob Dane and Ed Branson. And I also worked in another production shop in the Berkshires there for a little while. And at some points in time, I was the gaffer, not just the assistant, so they would, hand it over to me. And so I'd be making their work and trying to make it in their style. And from there, I was always kind of making some of my own work, on the weekends or on the side and stuff. And, I guess that's kind of how it evolved into a career. But the whole business side of thing, I never learned that in college. They never wanted to teach us about business of art or selling art, which I guess they've come around and now they teach that at Alfred, I've heard. But that was really hard because they said, oh, don't worry about selling it now, just worry about making it. So I always had that in my head, just worry about making it. But then how do you pay the bills? And, so it was when I started working with some of these other glass artists and apprenticing with them. And, then I started to realize, oh, this is how you sell your work. This is how you pack your work. All that early on stuff kind of led to where I am now, but yeah, like Ed Branson was a big influence on me, just helping me figure out the business side of things. I helped him do like the Baltimore American Craft Council show a few times, or the Philadelphia, Rosen show, some of the wholesale exhibits and stuff. I went there with him and we had so much fun and just, but I really learned about, building a booth and displaying your work and having it all be portable and pack upable and stuff. And so I did that for a number of years or a few years with him. And then I kind of branched out and built my own booth and kind of got into like the wholesale craft show market and stuff and sort of started building my business that way. And then eventually started doing more just retail based shows instead of the wholesale part of it. Cause I wanted to be doing, instead of making a whole bunch of the same thing over and over and over, I kind of wanted to go more sculptural. And around that time, I decided to go more sculptural. I also took a class at Pilchuck, which was in 2003 with Billy Morris, Karen Willenbrink Johnson, and Randy Walker, which was fabulous. I got a scholarship to take that class and I, it really taught me a lot about glass powders and glass colors. And like shortly after that class, I kind of had this shift in my work. And that's kind of like when I started making some of my wall sculptures with fruits and vegetables and incorporating more materials into my pieces with some metal and some wood, but also, having these smaller sculptural items become part of larger pieces and, higher end items and stuff. And that was sort of like the start of, taking it to the next level, I guess, and doing less wholesale production stuff and more into like one of a kind and limited edition type pieces, and so.
So like when you started, you were so green at first, right? And you went to RISD and then you went out to Pilchuck. Were you able to like make space for yourself, or do you feel like it was hard to like almost fit in or to like acclimate into like an environment with more experienced people? And do you feel like maybe it was different for you because you were a woman, or do you think that didn't play a part in it?
That definitely played into it a little bit, but there were plenty of other women there, a few in my class and a few others that were there, like at like the gaffer station and different various other, other women in other classes. And so I never really felt like, I don't know, I never really thought much about that so much as more about like, I'm pretty fresh and not that experienced. I've been blowing glass about a year and a half. Should I really even be in this class? I kind of like got nervous, but then once we started making stuff, I realized, oh, I'm not, I'm at a similar level to some of these other people because they were having to do sort of like retrain themselves after having like these higher levels of experience. They were kind of having to like retrain themselves to try to do it like Lino or like Dante. And whereas me, sometimes I had the advantage a little bit because I was fresher at it and I could tweak my, I wasn't stuck in my old habits, at that point. So maybe that was kind of a good thing because I kind of like learned the right habits pretty early on. And they really stuck with me. It sort of embedded in me at that point in time, I guess. So yeah, I felt like it wasn't a real intimidating place, but I do remember thinking back to some of those classes like, whoa, I was really, I was really young and I was really sort of, a newbie there, but it didn't stop me too much, but it was quite an experience, that first time there. So.
And did you like keep your painting going through this whole time? Because painting is like a major part of what you do still now, right?
It is. Yeah. I did take quite a long time off from painting because I just didn't really think that, like I did it through the end of my college years, and I painted a little bit kind of here and there. I was always drawing, but and a lot of the drawings became like these little sketches and not as involved drawing and stuff with shading or anything. It was more just these little line drawings, but my paintings, I really only kind of came back to painting about, like in the last 8 to 10 years, I decided I wanted to kind of revisit painting because I hadn't really had the time. I had just been focused mostly on glass. And so my paintings kind of came back, kind of turned on my painting brain. It's sort of like the other half of my brain, even though a lot of the colors and stuff and some of the forms are very similar, but it's interesting when I display them side by side because there's a very similar color palette. And when I'm using powders in the glass shop and I do a lot of layering with powders, my paintings, I have like a lot of layering with paint. So I do like a lot of thin washes with my paint when I'm painting a barn or a landscape or a sky, so I kind of do like a lot of like underpaintings and then layers over the top. And some of like my fruits and vegetables have a very similar kind of approach with the glass powders, So they sort of overlap in a weird way,
Can you talk a little bit about how you work through your design ideas? Do you draw everything out beforehand?
I usually try to, if it's something I haven't made before or like, some new idea that I'm coming up with, I usually try to, start with a series of sketches. And oftentimes it can be just like little line drawings, that I'm kind of wondering about how the glass will react. Sometimes I do a little color tests because some powders layered on top of each other are reactive. So it turns into like a weird brown that you were hoping for like a green or something. So there's like the color aspect of things, but also when I'm trying to come up with new forms and stuff, a lot of it's like I do my research, whether it's in my garden or at the grocery store or farmer's market or something. Or even sometimes, instead of doing a sketch or something, I'll buy like a small toy sheep or cow or whatever I'm trying to make and use that like kind of more three-dimensional reference, as well as some sketches. Cause, I usually, I try to simplify the forms. Like I try to get the essence of the form and then sort of break it down a little bit. If I'm trying to make a sheep, I don't make it exactly, I kind of simplify the form a bit and kind of make it more stylized, I guess. But yeah, I find that I always have a sketchbook with me and I try to plan out my day in the studio, like as best I can, through a series of sketches or just little descriptions of what colors I'm going to use. Sometimes I use colored pencils, but most often it's just like a little line drawing of what I'm going to make, or a series of line drawings. So
Has there been a point in time where you're like, I'm not sure if I'm going to live this creative life anymore? Like, have you ever felt stuck or that maybe you wanted to leave glass?
sometimes, it kind of depends. Yeah, I mean, sometimes I feel like I have like a creative block, but luckily for me, that doesn't seem to last too long. Sometimes I can flip through old sketchbooks of mine from years ago or look back through some of my older images from my work like 20 years ago or something. And that'll like sometimes, percolate new ideas or, things that kind of stem out of some of that earlier work. So I kind of sometimes feel like I go back to some of those pieces or even just looking at books or images of artists that influence me as well, other glass artist friends or whatever. Sometimes like things come out of it or from, thinking back to different workshops I took or whatever, it's just, I feel like the internet's really, it's nice to be able to keep in touch with so many of these artist friends I've met over the years, and everybody's like, follow along with everybody's careers and what they're making. And, it's a pretty wonderful thing. But yeah, I have had those thoughts, and I always think, oh, I still rent a studio to make my work. So I always think I rent Bob Dean's studio, which is about a half an hour away. And I rent there 1 to 2 days a week. And I often think, I'd like to have something here, but the way my studio barn is, it's like really old and it's connected to our house. And so we've renovated the barn a lot and sheetrocked it and fireproofed it and stuff, but it's sort of like, I don't know, I'd love to have one of those little small dragon furnaces or something someday, but that I could just fire up early in the morning and be blowing glass later that day. But yeah, that's the one thing I think like, sometimes I think, is this really worth it? But I don't know what else that I would do, I just love glass too much and I feel like there's just endless things you can make. So I just, it keeps me going, I guess. Like I look at Lino now and he's still, I mean, even though he's like technically retired, he's still kind of got all these ideas and he's still making things with his extra pieces and parts. And, it's like, it just seems like he just is going and going and going, into his 80s. And it's just pretty amazing inspiration, So I can't imagine doing anything else, I guess.
How do you separate out your days? So you rent out that studio a couple of times a week, but like your work is way more than just being in the hot shop. So then you have to cold work it. You got to make all your stands and then like your photos and your promotions and stuff. Do you make a schedule for yourself or do you just kind of do it as you feel fit or as like deadlines arise?
I sort of do it as things kind of fall into place. It's kind of day by day. I'm not great at planning ahead because usually there's always some wrench thrown in, whether it's something with my kids or, like basketball games to go to, or, it's sort of like the schedule, like I have a plan and then it just sort of like becomes something totally different usually. And so I just kind of go with the flow, but I definitely have days where I'm like, okay, I got to do a bunch of metalworking today because but that, like if I'm making some of my back panels for my wall sculptures, that's stainless steel. And so I have to, I have all these flat pieces of stainless steel and I have to order those and get those cut and delivered. And then I mark those all out. I have to drill them and bend the edges. And my husband has a little metal shop next to my studio, so I can go and use his metalworking equipment, which is awesome. And so I'll bend those up and then they all have to be sanded and then painted and then hand sanded. And so that's like a whole series of things. And so a whole series of steps with the metalwork. And then the woodworking is kind of a similar thing that sort of evolves over the course of like about a week's worth of work. So I'll do like multiple, like of my wood shelves, like mahogany woodworking. So, I'm covered with sand, sawdust some days and, glass dust other days and metal dust other days. So, and sometimes paint too. So it's so sometimes I'll take like a week or two and just focus on painting, so it's always kind of like evolving. And then somebody out of the blue will commission something and that totally throws a wrench in it, so something totally different, so that's, yeah, I just kind of go with the flow as much as I can, I guess. It's not the easiest lifestyle. It's a bit chaotic, a bit disorganized, but somehow I make it work, to be honest,
With all of those steps, how do you even begin to price something like that?
That's the tricky part. It is tricky. I've often asked my galleries for advice, and they've been really great about that, and I think that's kind of where some of my pricing for some of my higher end pieces started, is mostly just advice from my galleries. But it's hard to know when to raise those prices over the course of a number of years that I've been making similar series of work. That's always been a bit of a struggle for me. I've exhibited at SOFA Chicago a few times, and I often am curious about pricing of other people's work or looking at what's sold and that kind of thing, and, but I've been fortunate to show there several times, I showed there with Habitat Galleries. Most recently, that was in 2019, as well as with Riley Galleries as well, back in like 2009, 2010, around there. But yeah, so I'm always sort of on the lookout about other people's work and how it's priced. But I'm lucky that my galleries have been really helpful when I ask questions about advice. Like I have a certain price in mind sometimes, and I'll bounce it off them. And what do you think about this or that if I'm struggling with it? And they've been really good with helping me. So
Can you tell us a little bit about how your income is split? Is it mostly through galleries, or do you do private sales or commissions, or is it just like depending on the season or whatever comes up?
Yeah, it's funny. And it's really shifted with COVID and stuff. It was that, like I was doing like 2 or 3 shows a year with, bringing my work to, there were a few different shows, just a couple different shows I would do. And that was like one pretty good source of income. But I was also relying on gallery sales. I was in about, 8 maybe different high-end glass galleries. And they all did, with several of them did quite well with my work. And so I was getting used to that income. And I was doing like a little bit of Etsy sales on the side. And then all of a sudden when COVID hit, a lot of the galleries, the higher end galleries shut down or went virtual only. And then my gallery sales really dropped off. And then at that point, I started making some smaller pieces, and I sort of revamped my Etsy shop, and the Etsy sales really took off and did quite well and sort of carried me through the pandemic, where the galleries were more, I was selling a few pieces here and there with the galleries, but not nearly like it had been. And now it's kind of turning and coming back, and the galleries are starting to do a lot better in the last year or so. So it's sort of like, it was a little bit of a roller coaster there, I guess. But I feel like the Etsy has really helped me kind of stay in the loop and keep making. And, some of that stuff does become a little bit production-y. Like I make a lot of little potted plants, but everyone is pretty different from the next. So I keep like a variety going. And people seem like they've responded well. At the start of the pandemic, I was trying to really make, and then when I started kind of doing my Etsy shop and some other higher end pieces, I was really thinking about things to bring people joy, since people were really, everyone was like just in such a bad state. So, and that really seems like it's been a good thing, try to make uplifting work, and and it's been pretty successful. So it's just definitely a mix of, I was just actually going through my taxes and stuff and looking at the income and where the different levels lie, from the gallery sales to the Etsy sales to the private commission work, and some commissions are done through galleries. Other ones are clients I've had for many years that, bought my work really early on, and they come back around and want some sculptural stuff, which is kind of cool, so there's been, definitely some private commissions and some gallery commission work. So, but it's a bit of a, juggling everything to, every year is a little different as far as, what places sell the best, and, but I feel fortunate to have some of my higher end work in, 4 or 5 galleries that do pretty well with it. So I'm pretty happy with that at this point. Between that and juggling my own private sales and Etsy stuff.
So do you have anything to say on mom guilt? Do you have trouble balancing like your needs as an independent artist and like a small business owner technically, and just being a mom with 2 boys and all their activities?
It has not been the easiest thing, not been the easiest thing to juggle. Yeah, like I feel like it's hard enough to keep my own schedule kind of going in one direction, and then it's like, oh, they just scheduled another basketball or 2 more games for tonight, or there were supposed to be 2 tonight but they got canceled. There was supposed to be 2 last night, they got canceled. So it's sort of like, I love my boys, and I love, all the sports stuff they do and everything, that all the, they're pretty artistic too. So it's kind of fun to kind of see what they're coming up with on their own. And, we've got all the materials they need to, they like to do some painting. One of them last night had an old pair of sneakers he wanted to customize. So he's brought out some paint, and they like to paint the Nike symbols different colors. And it's kind of cool, and they don't need my assistance so much anymore. They're 12 and 13, but yeah, there's definitely that feeling of, oh, it's hard. Some days I find it hard to focus on my own work because I have so many other things, whether it's something that happened at school with them, or, one of them didn't do a certain assignment, so I'm emailing the teacher, or, it's hard to balance, to find the right balance, I think, as a mom. And the older they get, I feel like maybe it's getting a little bit easier, but I don't know. It's definitely easier than when they were toddlers, I'll send babies, but they're more independent now, which is nice. But it's still, once they get home from school, it's like, okay. It's, yeah. But they're, they get their homework to do and stuff. But it is, finding time as an artist and finding the right headspace. Some days I find that hard to kind of get that focus, which is, yeah. Sometimes I'm out in my studio really late at night, or sometimes I'm working on a painting. I'll just put it on the dining room table, and just, they're doing their stuff around me, and I can, I'm still there as an active parent, but I'm like focusing on my painting as much as I can. Sometimes they'll want to have if Mom, you got any extra canvases, and they'll want to paint with me, which is cool, or they want a little help with something, and do some projects or whatever. But so, yeah, I try not to have too much mom guilt, I guess, but there's a lot to juggle.
With all your life experience, is there any lesson that you might tell your younger self?
I don't know. I can't really think of too much I would change at this point. I was pretty fortunate to study with so many great people and stuff. I mean, I often think like, oh, what would have been like if I had built my own hot shop, early on or something, but then this, that, and the other thing wouldn't have happened, or my work wouldn't have evolved into metalwork and wood, so there's kind of pros and cons to things if I had gone a little bit different route, or, early on too, I thought maybe I should have moved out to Seattle. A lot of my friends from, college all went out to Seattle and I miss them dearly. And, I often think, oh, what would life have been like? But I feel like we're pretty lucky with what we have here. And I don't think there's too much I would change other than, wish I lived closer to some good friends, but but I feel like the glass side of me, I feel like I've been really fortunate and I don't think I would have changed too much.
Do you have anything that you'd want to end on? Any closing notes or advice that you'd want to give other people listening?
I think self-motivation is really key and just, keep pushing yourself and trying to take your work to the next level and just really, learn as much as you can, take as many classes as you can afford to take and study with people who you've, dreamt of studying with if you can get into those classes. I think that's really awesome. I've done some teaching myself. I hope to do some more teaching in the future and stuff. And I just think that, I feel like I get as much out of it as students as my students get. But yeah, I think just, pushing yourself, striving for as best you can do and, and try to take your work to the next level and don't be afraid to take chances in the studio and try something different, experiment. I think experimentation and with color and form and just with molten glass as a material is really important. And, I always feel like sometimes I'm not so sure about a piece I made, a new direction I've tried going in, but it always seems like, I'll take that snippet of something that I made and think, oh, well, maybe I should have done this. And then the next time I go to try to do it, it's like 10 times better, so it's sometimes something that you think is a mistake when you first make it, always try again and take it to, a little bit further on, I think would be some advice.
Perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Connected in Glass. Make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram for more information on the artists we interview and for updates on the podcast.